Thank you very much. Glad to see you.
In 15 years, 75% of the S&P 500 will be replaced by new companies. What this means is that for anybody in this room, or for anyone who becomes a new parent, by the time your kids reach high school, all of the most valuable companies that we know today will be surpassed by companies we maybe don't even know about. This was the conclusion reached by Dr. Richard Foster of Yale. He studied 100 years of stock market data, and he saw that over the last 50 years, the amount of time that the world's most valuable companies spend on top has decreased consistently from about 60 years on average to 17 years today. Here are an example of some of the companies that have fallen off the S&P 500 list in the last decade. See a lot of companies that we recognize, all different industries, including technology. And here are the companies that replace them. See eBay, Google, Netflix, and even Amazon since 2002. So while this trend has been happening over the last 50 years, a more recent phenomenon has happened in just the past 10. The startup renaissance. Never before in history have companies reached billion-dollar valuations so quickly. And never before have so many. In fact, globally, there is over 50 different companies founded in the last 10 years that are now billion-dollar valuation. And venture investors actually refer to billion-dollar startups as unicorns. It's a little weird that we have 50 unicorns today. So what's driving this entrepreneurial renaissance is a lot of things, but mainly economics. Services like AWS, in fact, there's a whole suite of business services that make it so that you can pay as you go, pay for what you use, for other things like legal, accounting, office space. They've made it so cheap to get started, and also cheap to scale. So the cost of failure for someone starting a new business has never been lower. In fact, it's almost immaterial at this point. And these changes in economics have driven a massive increase in the amount of investment going into the startup sector. In fact, startup investment has increased tenfold over the last 10 years, almost tenfold. So the combination of the economics and the abundance of capital creates a great opportunity for startups. But some of the smartest enterprises also see this as an opportunity for themselves. Why shouldn't they benefit from the exact same economics that startups do? And large companies as well have a giant war chest that which they can fund disruptive businesses. In fact, the corporate America has an order of magnitude more capital than all of Silicon Valley investors combined. Not to mention a vast network of expertise for which they can stay on the leading edge. At the heart of this opportunity is a new kind of innovation that's fundamentally different from what companies have been doing over the last 50 years. In the next 30 minutes, I'd like to share the knowledge with you so that you can start to become your own thought leader. And when you're meeting with your clients, you can articulate to them this opportunity and help them craft a roadmap into the promised land. So the main idea here is about these two different kinds of innovation that are fundamentally different. The first kind is what companies have been doing for the last 50 years, sustaining innovation. And sustaining innovation is taking our existing business lines and making small changes to them, small improvements, so that we can deliver better performance to our existing customers at a lower cost. These are things like a new flavor of Coca-Cola, a new flavor of toothpaste, a new type of shoe, a new type of insert whatever our company does today here. And these innovations are, for the most part, predictable, and I'll show you why they're very different from what companies are now starting to do. And when you speak to an innovation manager inside a company, most of them are hired to be sustaining innovation managers. The clear tell here is because they don't have any budget, because they're not actually supposed to create new things. They're supposed to find synergies across the existing business units. So this is how companies have been innovating for 50 years, and most innovation people inside companies are sustaining innovation managers. Now, on the other side, we have disruptive innovation. This is what startups have been doing. This is what startups have been doing in the last 10 years. And this is creating completely different products that with the goal of being 10 times cheaper, 10 times faster, 10 times better. And also accessing new sets of customers that our old products hadn't accessed before. This type of innovation is very unpredictable, right? Many people doubted the iPhone was a good idea when Apple first announced it. They thought, oh, they'll never be able to compete with BlackBerry. They'll never be able to replace this keyboard that I love. And so both of these types of innovation are important capacities for companies to have, right? They need to be innovating in a sustaining manner to stay at the head of their market. They also need to develop disruptive innovation capacity so that within a decade, they can transform into the way the industry is going. And there's a struggle inside companies, of course, to adopt these disruptive practices because of the old way of thinking, and this change is being driven by the new way of thinking. So let me explain to you those two different forms. In the old way of thinking, you have to realize that most of the world's largest companies are publicly traded, and Wall Street biases them towards the short term. So executive leaders are always concerned about quarterly-based results. What am I going to hit next quarter? The average executive may spend only 2 years in a single role, and the average public CEO tenure is only 5 years. So when it comes to sustaining innovation, these are small improvements which could drive new revenue by the next quarter. Sounds awesome. And when you talk about disruptive products, these things take 10 years to reach maturity. Not very exciting for almost anybody because they'll be long gone. In fact, you could be on the third CEO since the time the idea was hatched. Another part of the old way of thinking is that sustaining innovations are very high ROI, right? Because we're leveraging the technology we've already paid money to research, we're leveraging the customers we've already paid to acquire, and we're even leveraging other people's ideas in the company, right? Building social capital. Disruptive innovations actually try to tell other people in the company that their ideas are inferior, right? We're actually cannibalizing our existing lines of business and threatening potentially thousands of jobs in our business. So you can see why, for the last 50 years, companies have not wanted to do this. Until now, when really the new way of thinking is coming about, which is these sustaining innovations are very short-lived. There's only so many flavors of toothpaste that you can come up with, so many different features that you can add to your core products, and eventually someone's going to come up and sideline you and come up with a 10 times better product that is using fundamentally different rules. In addition, disruptive innovations have huge upside. So the iPhone represents 55% of Apple's revenue. Right? 55% of their revenue is one of their newest products since the last decade. The iPad represents about a quarter of the revenue. Laptops and computers represent 11%. Right? That was their core business before. So disruptive innovations can take a company to entirely the next level, pave them into the new industry. Disruptive innovations, or sustaining innovations, are also somewhat uninspiring. Right? How many of our customers want to hear about a small change that we're doing, a new version of the same thing? It's not very inspiring. Disruptive innovations actually promise to take our customers and society into the future. This is the best way to attract better talent and to attract better partnerships, to be on the leading edge. So this is the new way that the smartest enterprises are seeing the potential for disruptive innovation. And now that I've showed you kind of the difference here, let's dive into what disruptive innovation actually looks like. So this is a graph called the startup curve. And remember, startups innovate disruptively. It's from Paul Graham, who's the founder of Y Combinator, a well-known Silicon Valley incubator. And he says, every successful startup follows this pattern. Before you start, your happiness, we have happiness on the x-axis and time on the y-axis. Before you start, your happiness is just average. You're how you are every day, right? But when we decide to get started, on day one, we are so excited. This is the greatest thing ever. We're setting out on our dream, to accomplish our dream. Inevitably, though, what happens on day two? Reality sets in, and all startups enter what we call the trough of sorrow, right? This is where life isn't very good, right? It's really tough, and you don't know if the activities and the energies and the efforts you're putting forth are going to lead you to the dream you set out for yourself. You may be making progress, but it looks like you're going in circles. It requires a lot of persistence, flexibility, experimenting, and pivoting. And most startups fail here. They don't fail because they couldn't build the technology. They don't fail because they're working on time travel. It's a really hard technical problem. Most startups are working on software applications, mobile applications, web applications, where the technology is not that complicated. They fail because they actually can't find something that people want. And so this, of course, happens without corporate politics, without corporate bureaucracy. We'll talk about that later, how that adds to this effect. But very few companies make it to the point where something starts working, and even fewer make it to what we call the promised land of product market fit. You found something that people want, you've honed that idea to the right form factor, and you can scale the business. And in fact, you look like an overnight success. But every successful company, new company, goes through the trough of sorrow, 2 years in the trough of sorrow, to become an overnight success. Now, in a large company, this is how business is done, right? You're not searching for something people want. We already know what people want. We have a long operating history. It's just about executing upon that. Whereas in disruptive innovation, as I said, it's just fundamentally different. It couldn't be, it's the opposite for the most part. And so in this type of work, we need fundamentally different methods for how we do business. And we need new tools as well. So this was a quote from Andy Jassy at his recent keynote, and I really liked it because he said, when it comes to business transformation, a lower cost structure is an enabler, but the main driver is agility. You know, I've met with a lot of executives talking about disruptive innovation and these things, and I say, you know, hey, how would you like to be 100 times faster? And many executives in the old way of thinking will just look at you like, why would I want that? Right? We're slow and steady wins the race. But when you frame it in terms of this new form of work and this new capacity, they finally start to get the importance of speed. Because if you take money away from a startup, they're not going to like you, but it's not going to kill them, right? The way you kill a startup is by slowing them down. Right, so seeing how different this process is really makes it clear the value of agility. Now, one thing I did want to mention, the slide didn't come up, is that the methods I'm about to show you, so I just showed you what it looks like, I'm going to show you how to do it. The methods I'm about to show you have never been taught until about 2010. In fact, Harvard and Stanford business schools finally implemented courses to teach these practices in 2010. And many other large companies like Intuit, Qualcomm, hundreds of companies now are teaching these practices because they simply didn't have these methods before. And so if you're on the phone with an executive and they got their MBA before 2010, guess what? These methods weren't a part of their curriculum. So that's how new and how countered these processes are. So there's three methods, there's three sort of principles here. We've been teaching these all around the world. MVPs, pivots, and early adopters. And they all have an S because there's multiple of them in all cases. The first concept, oh, there's that slide. The first principle is minimum viable products. So remember, startups fail not because of technology, but because they build the wrong things. They waste time. They actually don't reach product market fit. And so if that's the case, well, then what we want to do is not spend all of our money on one product, right? We want to run experiments. We want to actually build the minimum amount that we need to learn if what we're going to do is actually what customers want. So the MVP actually isn't necessarily a product. It's just expending the minimum amount of effort that we need to learn if what we're going to do is what customers want. This is how we handle the uncertainty. And there's many techniques you can use: customer interviews, landing pages, before a product exists, and even delivering a technology product as a service. And entrepreneurs and innovators are using this approach to validate new businesses. The second principle is the idea of pivoting. So it has become a pretty overused word in the startup world, but pivoting essentially means that if we're likely to be wrong because of the uncertainty and we're likely to fail because we built the wrong thing, then we send out our minimum viable product to learn if it's what customers want, and if they don't want it, we change what it is, right? So a pivot is a change in strategy without a change in vision, and every successful startup has pivoted, okay? Instagram actually started as a location-based social network. Twitter started as a podcasting site. PayPal started as payments over the Palm Pilot. YouTube started as a dating website. And Groupon started as an online voting website. All of these founders were super passionate about their ideas, thought they had the best idea ever, went out to market, found they were wrong, and they weren't stubborn about it. They doubled down on what customers wanted, right? The third and final principle is this idea of early adopters. Now, early adopters are a special set of customers that you need in order to introduce a disruptive product. Early adopters aren't necessarily people that read TechCrunch. Those are techies. They are people that have the pain you're trying to solve so greatly that they've been searching for a solution, they've tried to solve it themselves, they've spent money on a solution, and they might have even made their own solution. So early adopters don't care about brand names. They just want to have the best solution to their problem. And when we're introducing new disruptive products, these are the only people we care about. We don't care about the mass market. We're not looking at market research to figure out where the market is today. We're looking at early adopters to figure out where the market's going tomorrow. And so doing this process is fundamentally an exercise in predicting the future. Okay, it's not market research. It's customer development. And we rely on early adopters to tell us how close we are to delivering product market fit, how close we are to developing something that the rest of the market will want. And so here is a trick for you to identify early adopters, because when you're talking to somebody about their problem, about their idea, they look exactly like this. This is the early adopter face. We call it the cookie monster. It's like giving a cookie to a cookie monster. That's how you know you found an early adopter, because they're foaming at the mouth. You've just told them something and drawn it on the back of a napkin. They want to buy it right now. Okay, that's an early adopter. And if you can't find early adopters, guess what? The product will never be successful. So those are the three principles of how you do the disruptive innovation, but I didn't say anything about how to do it in a corporate context. So let's go into the kind of things about actually applying this in a larger corporation, and there's three ideas here. The first is horizon planning. Horizon planning is a corporate framework for annual budgeting. And the point of it is that when senior leaders meet to allocate budget for the year, they bucket all of the projects into 3 different buckets. And the point is to make sure that enough resources are allocated towards long-term projects. Because remember, the bias inside a large company is always towards the short term. So this is how Intuit does it. Intuit is a big proponent of this method, and this is how they do it. The first bucket is for the core businesses. They allocate about 60% of their budget to projects on a 1 to 3 year time horizon, so that in 3 years they're going to get the money back. The second bucket is rising stars and emerging businesses inside the company. They allocate 30% of their budget, and these are said to reach maturity in 4 to 6 years. And finally, 10% to disruptive technology and new products. These are the products with a 7 to 10 year time horizon. And this is what we care about here. We care about the third bucket. And we often meet with innovation managers who they've kind of come onto the idea of disruptive innovation, the opportunity, and they always want to know how to get the resources to make their vision happen. And when we give them this framework, we tell them about the companies that are using it, they get it, and they bring this framework to their senior leaders to make sure that they are allocating, or that they will in the future allocate this amount of budget to disruptive products and disruptive capacity. Okay. The second idea is innovation flow. So disruptive innovation is so unpredictable that you need a certain sample size of products and ideas to have any success. In later stage investment, it's a well-known rule that 1 in 10 investments will pay for all of them. Right? When you go earlier, you need an even larger sample size. And so how do we create that type of energy inside a big company where we have enough ideas and employees are contributing their ideas to turn them into disruptive products? Again, Intuit is a great example here. This is how they do it. And actually, if you are prospecting a potential company, I would definitely compare them against Intuit, because Intuit has a very high level of innovation readiness. And they focus on 3 areas: education, opportunity, and rewards. Education is always the biggest barrier when it comes to creating innovation capacity inside a large company, because corporate employees are, first of all, they don't know how to come up with good ideas yet. They haven't been doing it a lot, and they don't know the first steps to take when they have an idea and what to do with it. And Intuit runs regular workshops across the company every month on design thinking, on lean startup, and on ideation and brainstorming. So they've literally trained almost every employee in the company on how to come up with ideas and what to do with them immediately when you get them. And every time I meet with the company, this is the first thing that I recommend in terms of how you increase the innovation capacity inside a large company. If you don't train enough people in a large company, you're never going to change the culture, because it's about reaching a critical mass of people in a large organization that understand how to come up with ideas and what to do with them. The second thing is giving those employees the opportunity to exercise their education. Intuit has unstructured time, which means that they have 10% of their week to work on whatever projects they want. The thing I love about unstructured time is that it kind of shields employees from the naysayers, because it's understood that their 10% of their time, they can work on whatever they want. It doesn't have to be about the corporate strategy. It can be more of the disruptive nature. In addition, Intuit has innovation challenges, where on a quarterly or semi-annual basis, they get everybody together to brainstorm ideas, form teams, and work on an idea. And they have a winner at the end of the innovation challenge. And lastly, they have rewards. So Intuit has innovation vacation, right? If you're an innovator, you can get recognized and get extra vacation. And they also have a founders award, where if you create a significant new business line inside the company, you will actually be awarded a 7-figure package. So they've got their stuff down. Now, the third idea here is my favorite. Every company today has an innovation lab, and I hate innovation labs, because most of them, of course, are also designed around sustaining innovation, where they're beholden to the business units, they're not trying to come up with anything disruptive. And just the idea of a lab is like where ideas go to never escape. So when studying the different structures that companies have used to bring the ideas to market, we've identified a few different structures that work really well, and we've coined this innovation colony. The idea is that it's invoking the idea of when established countries were looking for economic advantage, and they sailed the distant shores, and they founded new nations. So the core idea of the innovation colony is that I've seen so many innovation teams that did absolutely everything right, absolutely everything by the book, had great ideas, were positioned to go to market and be incredibly successful. But what happened? The corporate antibodies came around and said, we don't like this is threatening, so quietly shut it down. And remember, disruptive products are fundamentally different from how companies are used to operating. So you can't have them on a leash, you can't suffocate them, you can't slow them down, or they're going to die. And the point of the innovation colony is to create a level of independence to allow disruptive products to be successful. This includes financial and strategic. So many companies, this manifests itself many times in the form of a spin-out where a separate entity is created, or it could be as a separate office, right? Actually, you should all know how AWS was created, right? It was a separate office, I believe in South Africa. But you're giving these disruptive products independence to make their own decisions and to move quickly. And the type of safeguards that companies get are different, right? Most of the time they have financial safeguards where they are a investor, and so they have board rights or voter privileges, and also social. A lot of this is based on relationships. So who here can tell me where this product was created? Yes, in the front row. Yes. Right? Xerox created the technology behind the Macintosh. In 1979, Steve Jobs visited Xerox and said, hey guys, can I borrow this graphical user interface? Can I borrow this mouse? These are great ideas. And they said, sure, Steve, go ahead and borrow them. And as we know where Apple is today, and we know where Xerox is today. And this is what I see with almost every innovation lab, is that the ideas never leave unless Steve Jobs borrows them. And this is a well-known story, but you may not know that there's a couple other examples of Xerox PARC. Has anyone ever heard of Ethernet? Ethernet was developed in 1973 by Bob Metcalfe, a researcher at Xerox. He tried to convince executives for 6 years to do something with it. He was downloading, I believe it was 3 megabits a second or something like that, maybe a minute. But he was watching Netflix in 1970. And the executives wouldn't do anything with the technology. So he actually left and started a company called 3Com, which later went public. And there's another example. The graphical software that ended up founding Adobe. Researchers were there for 5 years, and Xerox wouldn't do anything with it. Executives said, oh, this isn't core to what we do today. This isn't core to our identity. It's not, we don't have a strategic advantage in it. We're not going to do anything with it, right? So there was no incentive to commercialize technology. And about 5 years later, a book was written by 2 McKinsey consultants called Fumbling the Future, which featured Xerox. And finally, when 2 McKinsey consultants wrote about it, the executives decided to do something about it. And they founded Xerox Technology Ventures. And Xerox Technology Ventures was an internal venture fund. That's probably the best way to describe it, as an internal venture fund. And basically, they had $30 million in funding, which is not a lot in that time period. This is in the late 80s. And they could write a $2 million check to researchers to get them started without any approval. And they had internal access to sales teams and marketing teams and a lot of internal resources. And so this is how the entities the new entities worked. They were separate companies. Xerox had 80% of the ownership. The researchers got 20% of the ownership. And they funded several businesses. They worked with other venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. In 7 years, guess what happened with this? The value of their portfolio and the companies they wrote the first check in was worth more than Xerox after 7 years, okay? Doing these spin-outs. In 12 years, those companies are worth 10 times Xerox. So, giving companies independence and working with outside investors allowed them to reach success. And my favorite part of this story is that at the same exact time frame, there were many internal innovation teams. Guess how many of those internal innovation teams were successful? And in fact, they invested more money in internal innovation teams than the $30 million of pocket change they gave to Xerox Technology Ventures. None. So I love this case study. I highly recommend that you read up more on it because there was actually a documented control group of the difference between spinning out companies and keeping them inside. Another case study. Everybody here uses Twitter? Anybody? Okay. Not a lot of enthusiasm there. Anyone know where Bizstone worked before Twitter? Before he left to do Twitter? Okay, so he was at Google, and actually, he had $2 million in Google stock options that he left on the table. He didn't have any savings, and Twitter wasn't the first idea. He actually left to start a podcasting startup. Right? They ended up pivoting, and a lot of the most successful recent companies were Google employees who found it easier to innovate outside the corporate walls and decided to just leave. And if you do the research, almost every successful founder left corporate America. The average tech entrepreneur has 13 years of work experience. Okay, they're not all just dropping out of Ivy League schools. Right? The average tech entrepreneur has 13 years of work experience. And there's a big misconception that entrepreneurial individuals are risk takers. They've done a lot of studies on this. There's no connection between a risk appetite and a decision to start a company. Right? There's a lot of other outlets in life that you can take risk in. But there has been a study done by Harvard. It was studied 27,000 individuals on why people start companies. And there are two things that it showed. The first one is that an early entrepreneurial experience will make you more likely to start a company. The second is the value that you place on certain rewards. So in this study, they found that employees, their number one value, the rewards that they value for their work, out of 13 different rewards, security and recognition, number one, number two. And for entrepreneurs, power and control. Ooh, very different. Very, very different, right? And this control can be autonomy. Power means sometimes wealth, financial gain. But the interesting thing is that where entrepreneurial individuals valued security, dead last, right? So the compensation, the way we compensate entrepreneurial individuals and companies is the way we try to compensate employees, and it doesn't match up, right? We know that we compensate salespeople different than we compensate normal employees, but we haven't gotten to the point inside companies where we made the same connection with innovators who take risks to bring new products to market. So the key thing here in identifying entrepreneurial individuals is that they have security and they don't need recognition for their work. Maybe they have recognition in other ways. So after Bizstone started Twitter and left Google, and Google actually tried to acquire Twitter many times, Google created Google Ventures with the purpose, among other things, of investing in the network of employees that are leaving to start companies. And this works very well specifically for the context of Silicon Valley that they were in, because if you don't leave, you're not really. In Silicon Valley, if you don't leave, then you're not serious. And what we're seeing is that the difference between employee and ex-employee are fading, and that companies are wanting to keep in touch with former employees who have the expertise from working there to see what they're working on and be a part of the action. Last case study. Microsoft, their corporate accelerator. Corporate accelerators are one of the biggest new crazes today, and I love corporate accelerators, and many of them fit the Innovation Colony criteria. So in Microsoft's corporate accelerator, they had $2 million in funding. It's actually for Azure, by the way. $2 million in funding, and they could write a $100,000 investment in every company. They would take 7%, and the geeks would get 93%. So that's why they're so happy. And in 3 months later, they took 10 companies. They invested $2 million, including in the operations. Those companies raised a total of $20 million from outside investors. Right. The point of the accelerator was, in 3 months, to get to market, to raise outside capital from other investors. And the greatest part about the story is that there was a company called MetricsHub. And MetricsHub was a group of former Microsoft employees who had left to work on this idea. And then they heard about the corporate accelerator, they applied, they got in. And 3 months in the program, they had customers, they were in market, and guess what? They had term sheets from investors. And so the Microsoft executives said, wow, we really like this team. This could really fit into what we're already doing. And they offered to acquire the team back into the company. And the key part is that this being outside of the corporate walls and having independence allowed them to get to market faster. And having access to outside investors also allowed Microsoft to effectively value the company, right? The startup world has a somewhat efficient market when it comes to capital and valuing companies, and because they steal so much deal flow. The executives thought this was amazing because they would have never been able to value that company, and they would never been able to get to market as fast as they did. And they bought them back for what was a great return for the entrepreneurs and an extremely cheap price for Microsoft. This product now serves as part of the back end for Azure, which I'm sure you know generates $11 billion a year. So that's the end, but I want to leave you guys with one thing. 2015 is going to be an awesome year, and I believe that 2015 is the start of something really big in terms of innovation happening in the enterprise. In the next 10 years, we're going to see more innovation, more improvements in quality of life, and more solutions to some of the world's greatest problems. But it's really up to you guys to share these ideas and to give innovators the tools they need to be more successful. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Thank you very much.